quite often I see MLROs are just seen as the person that you can blame if things go wrong.
Money makes a world go round. It makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. I'm your host, Marit, CEO of Strise, and in this episode, we are asking, how do we stop MLRO burnout? Money laundering reporting officers, known as MLROs, are a vital component of financial services, a crucial link between the company, the risks they face, and the conversations with authorities. Last year, the UK's Financial Conduct Authority sent a warning to hundreds of companies who had burned through 3 or more MLROs in just 3 years. What does this all tell us? Are there unreasonable expectations on this job, high stress, or is this just a competitive marketplace where talent can move around? In today's episode, we're joined by a great guest to discuss the problems with the MLRO role today, what needs to change to stop this revolving door situation, and why is it so important to get this right? To dive into this topic, I'm here with Adam Vilaca, Principal Consultant, Pathlight Associates. Welcome to The Laundry, Adam.
Thanks, Marit. Thanks for the introduction.
Can you start by telling our listeners about you, your background, and your relation to this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first started working in financial crime about sort of 7 or 8 years ago. I worked for the Serious Fraud Office in London as a investigative lawyer. So I was investigating allegations of bribery and corruption. I did that for a while before joining the consulting world. So I worked for a Big Four consulting firm working in financial crime. Got to work across Europe and Asia Pacific with some pretty large banks. And then I took an opportunity to become an MLRO for a European fintech. So I was a regional MLRO that covered UK, Ireland and Malta. And after having done that for a while and having sort of been through a bit of MLRO burnout, I took the decision to go back into consulting where I work now. So I've sort of seen this from different angles.
Thank you. It should be interesting to dive into this topic. So let's start by looking at why we have this high turnover of MLROs today. To set the scene, let's look back at your experience in this sector at this major European fintech. So when you started as the MLRO, what did your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, look, good question. I think every day was different. And I think there's always the challenge of balancing the day-to-day operational financial crime issues that come up. So, that's dealing with escalations, looking at transaction alerts that have been elevated from investigators, things like that, through to the larger, more sort of strategic projects. So, are certain systems set up correctly? Are policies and procedures set up correctly? Are things, do things need to be rewritten? Do you need to have, proper governance and oversight of your daily work? Are you doing that correctly? So I sort of see the two streams, and they're always competing with one another in terms of the time that they take from you. So to say, what does a typical day look like? I don't think there is a typical day. You can have, time penciled for a week or two or a month to focus on a project, and then something comes up with you're at local financial intelligence unit or a local police force that you've got to deal with, and that has to take priority. So it's varied.
So the topics that you mentioned, they are familiar to anyone working with financial crime, and I'm sure it was familiar to you as well, having worked in the consultancy world before coming into this. But when you got into the MLRO job, what was the thing that surprised you the most that you didn't expect it to be?
Yeah, I think when you're a consultant, you sort of feel like you have an expectation that you can take over a situation and you can run an organization. And sometimes you reflect with some clients and go, have they got themselves into this mess? So I think probably naively I thought, I'll be able to do this easy. I've done this. I've given this advice to many, many clients before. And I think what was surprising was the volume of work and the difference in work that you had to do as an MLRO. So you're not just taking a discrete particular regulatory issue, which you might more frequent for a consultant to come in and look at. You've also got to look at the broader commercials. You've got to look at, well, if I make a certain financial crime decision, what are the business implications for that? So I think that was probably one of the most challenging things, was getting my head around all of the different aspects and angles that an MLRO needs to cover.
And I can, and in general, in business literature, people talk a lot about, the context switching. That's really hard when you jump between a lot of different topics, and just the sheer amount of volume on top of this context switching. I can imagine it was like such an overwhelming workload.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I'd also moved into a position where it'd been vacant for a while, so there was some outstanding sort of backbook issues that needed to be dealt with. And I was a regional MLRO, so I did have a group MLRO that I was reporting to, but I was covering 3 countries, 2 of which were new branches. So I had to quite quickly get my head around where the 2 new branches were at, and then sort of figure out some of the outstanding UK issues. And there was a period of time where I had to try and repair the relationship with certain police forces in the UK that had outstanding inquiries with us that hadn't been properly dealt with to the level that the UK authorities had expected. And then there was also a large project around getting our FCA application post Brexit right. So we were passporting into the UK prior to Brexit, and then had to finalise our FCA standalone e-money license. So there was a lot of spinning plates, and I had to try and get my head around a lot. And also, when I started off, I didn't really have a big team based in the UK. I had some sort of external European resources I could lean on. But I had to sort of build the business case to hire some people in the UK to help me out due to the volume of work that we sort of had to get through.
So the responsibilities are wide, and the volume is high, and it's so much work, as you're describing. Do you remember, or was there like a pivotal moment where you decided, okay, now is the time for me to leave? How did the decision to leave come about?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I think the reason for me, and I think this is the most important thing for any MLRO, is making sure the culture of the organization you're in is a good one, and to understand that the business's risk appetite aligns with your own personal risk appetite. I think, as an MLRO, you're accountable and responsible to the regulator, whatever country you're in. And if you've got a business that has an immense risk appetite and is not willing to mitigate that risk in a way that you as the MLRO see fit, your position essentially becomes untenable. And I sort of got to a point where I personally wasn't comfortable with the amount of risk that the business was taking on. And so I thought the right decision was to leave. As I saw many other regional MLROs at the firm that I worked for do as well. I think, and again, not just as my experience as MLRO, I've seen this with clients, is that you get to a point sometimes where MLROs, what they signed up for, and what the business was doing at the beginning of their journey changes significantly as businesses do. And you get to a point where the business is doing something completely different. And that makes the position very difficult for not just the MLRO, but anyone who's sort of working in the compliance function.
Because it's not just you who have experienced this MLRO burnout. We've seen it in the reports from the FCA, from comments in other people in the industry. And when I posted about this on LinkedIn, I got an overwhelming response to it. And one of the people who commented on my post, Gavin Ball, wrote on LinkedIn that MLROs are undervalued, overworked, and under-resourced, and very stressed.
Couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. And I think we, as an MLRO, you have a very, very important, a vital role within the organization. And I think one of the challenges that I face and many other MLROs face is the constant discussion around resourcing and finance. I think because compliance is always a cost center and we don't bring money into a business, you have to have a practical conversation with people who control the purse strings within any firm, be it small or large. And you're constantly battling to justify why you should have more people, or why you should have more budget, or why you should have more of a salary. And when other parts of the business can quite easily say, well, we've brought in, X hundreds of thousands or X millions, you get to the MLRO compliance function, and we're never going to bring money in. The only way that we can really measure our success is by stopping the risk from happening and fines. So I think quite quickly organizations will quite quickly blame an MLRO if something goes wrong, but won't necessarily fund them and resource them to do the job the way that they see fit.
Do you think then MLROs are being a bit ignored internally?
I think they can do. I think it depends on the culture of the organization. I've worked with clients that the MLROs put their hand up and said, I need some help on this. And very quickly they get the support and the resource they need to bring external consultants or external support in to deal with a certain issue early on. But other times it has to be a complete car crash until they get listened to. And by then, a lot of the time, they've either wanting to leave the business, have left the business, or have been kicked out of the business. And, you know, there's been a number of clients that I've worked with where you go back and review notes and reports that MLROs have left, and they've been saying warning, 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 issue, and it's not been listened to. So, yeah, it is a big problem, and I think it varies from the size of the problem varies based on the size of the business. You get the same sort of issues happening at smaller firms as you do at bigger firms, but again, it's all proportionate based on the size of the firm that you're talking about.
So there's been a lot of MLROs leaving their job, and one argument could be that there is a better paid opportunity somewhere else. So it might just be a competitive market, and MLROs are in high demand and there's a better opportunity somewhere else. Do you think there is any truth to that? To that?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, we discussed earlier about how you're constantly having to justify your existence and the resources that you need and the pay for both yourself and your people. I think, you know, when you look at MLROs and where they traditionally come from, a lot of them have legal or tech backgrounds. And if you go back into you know the consulting world or law firm environments, things like that, with practical experience, you can earn a lot more money. And yes, you know, compared to maybe the average salary out there, MLROs do get paid quite well. But you look at the amount of risk and accountability and that they have to take on board and the potential to go to jail, it's not necessarily proportionate. And there is, you know, a lot of money to be made out there in other roles using the experience and skills that you gain as an MLRO. But I've also seen, you know, on the other hand, within certain financial services firms, there are huge salaries being paid to people who are earning big commissions, which is great. But I think some of that needs to be shared around with the people that hold the risk as well.
I agree. I mean, if you're taking on personal risk and might even go to jail in the extreme case, of course, then you should be paid accordingly. But
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
happens if we don't address this revolving door culture when it comes to MLRO? What will be the real world implications here?
Yeah, I think the real world implications are you're going to constantly have people who are either ill equipped or very new to the role doing the role, who are not doing it particularly well. And that, I mean, has a societal risk that you've got businesses that aren't capturing financial crime and reporting it the way that they're expected to do so. But I think for firms, the big challenge they face is they don't have that continuity within their business. You know, it takes a period of time for any new MLRO, you know, if they've moved to a new organization, to understand the business, to understand the products, to understand the geographic risk. That takes time. And if you're constantly losing people who have spent some time in that position and developed that knowledge at the point where they've only been there, you know, 6 to 12 months, which I would say is the absolute minimum to get your head around any organization. If you're constantly recycling through those people, you're never going to have the skill set and knowledge within your firm to do the job that is expected of an MLRO. And I think that comes down to what the FCA's point has been, is that they're concerned that firms aren't retaining that knowledge. I think that there's a lot of work to be done on the FCA side as well. I don't think the FCA necessarily have good retention of their own staff. So when you do deal with the FCA on issues as an MLRO, quite often you're dealing with one issue and you deal with 3 different people in the times that you're dealing with that one issue as an MLRO. So, you know, the issue is on both sides. It's not just at the firm side, it's also at the FCA side. And I think, again, it comes down to salary. I think the FCA don't pay particularly well compared to some of the big banks. And I think people go there for a period of time to gain the skills they need to then move on with their careers. So it's a big problem.
So Okay, we have now laid out all of the problems, so let's jump to the next topic, which is the solution. How can we solve this? So, let's start with, if you were to think back at your own job as an MLRO, what will be the top thing that you could change in order to make you stay?
Yeah, I think support and resourcing, money, they're all really important things. And I think, had that have been different, it probably would have impacted my decision. But I think, too, it ultimately comes down to culture. I think firms need to really understand and appreciate the value an MLRO can bring to a business. MLROs are not always the people that say no. They're the people that say, well, we can do this, but we can do it in this particular way to mitigate risk and create business opportunities. I think if that culture can change within firms, you'll see the real value that MLROs can bring, as opposed to just sort of being an insurance policy, which quite often I see them as being. I think quite often MLROs are just seen as the person that you can blame if things go wrong, and the people that say no. I think that needs to change. I think that the salaries within the sector need to change. Like I said, on both sides, I think there needs to be greater acknowledgement through bonuses and things like that for MLROs when things are going well, to retain good people and to reward the positives, the good things that MLROs are doing. The fact that an external investigation is no longer happening because of good work that they've done, reward that sort of conduct. I think from the FCA side, they need to certainly, and not just the FCA, other financial crime law enforcement agencies really need to improve the pay so that the regulators are being more efficient and more effective and retaining good people as well.
So you talked about culture being at the center of this, and not just use the MLRO as a scapegoat, someone to blame when things go wrong. How do you think, if banks, financial services companies who are listening that maybe think, ouch, we should maybe change our culture a bit, what kind of advice would you give to top management to kind of put more emphasis on compliance to retain their MLRO?
Yeah, I mean, look, culture in banking is something that's always discussed. It's been discussed for many, many years. I think there's more of a focus on it, and people are more aware of it. But whether it's 100% there at the moment, probably not. I think MLROs, banging the drum constantly of how good they are to an organization and the good things they're doing is important. But I just think that you almost need to have a day in the life of an MLRO for other people who don't work in financial crime side of the business. I think there needs to be some improved transparency of board members, for example, the very, very senior people within organizations spending more time with their financial crime compliance function to actually see the challenges. Because I know certain boards and certain organizations, they'll get their annual report, they'll look through the numbers and go, well, we've got X amount of SARs that have increased, or we've had this project that's happened. They don't necessarily understand the day-to-day pressures that MLROs and other financial crime compliance staff are facing. And I think once they gain a better understanding of the day-to-day, there will be a better turnaround and tone from the top in relation to resourcing and the salaries and the like.
You talked about the culture in banking. So obviously at Strise we work with a lot of banks and payment companies too. But I got to say that whenever I meet the people on the compliance side, AML side, it's just very different from like a typical banking culture, because people usually go into the financial crime prevention side to do good. It's not to make money. So it's usually just so friendly, well-meaning people who just want to do a good thing. So meeting those type of people, and I didn't have a background in financial services before starting to work in AML. It's just been such a like pleasant experience. Like this morning I went to visit one of our banking customers, and it's just really, really nice, and it's really good to have these open-ended discussions about what's happening and the risks and what the crimes you're seeing, etc. But you also said this, the MLROs are usually just seen as the people who say no. And I had the head of AML from Vipps Mobile Pay on the show quite a while back, and she talked about how they had implemented this early bird principle. I think that's what she called it. And they had like this really nice, theme around it. And it was like, the earlier you guys invite us in any type of process, product development, whatever, the higher the chances that we say yes. So she had used
Absolutely.
this early bird principle to kind of push it back on the organization, the commercial sides, to get them involved so they can say yes, instead of coming at the very end before a product launch or before something and they're like, no, we can't do this, like, why haven't you notified us before?
Absolutely. And I think, if you've got the compliance, and this is not just for financial crime, but compliance more generally, I think if you bring your compliance people along on the journey with you, you've got a much better chance of making it work. And I've seen within many organizations who've done that have a really, really good result and outcome. I think when you just look at compliance and financial crime as, well, we've got to get this past these guys right at the end, it's just a tick the box that we need to go through. That's generally when you're going to have bigger issues because they don't understand it properly. And I think when you look at the general, and I'm speaking generically, the people that go into the financial crime world, especially things like fintechs, generally speaking, we don't have a technical background. I mean, there are certain MLROs who have come from that side of things, but compliance people generally don't have that particular strength in their skill set. And if you take them on the journey and you explain to them how it works, and you explain how this bit of code is going to work, and you explain and explore the geographic risk, and it goes both ways, the financial crime people explaining why there's a geographic risk in a certain area for delivering a certain product, you develop a more harmonious approach, and there isn't that hostility between, that you traditionally see with the second line of defense.
So you went from consulting, MLRO, and now you're back as a consultant. So
I am, yes.
In your current role as a consultant, have you done anything? Have you changed? So change in a way that you're now championing MLRO differently? Do you consult differently now, having this MLRO experience? I'm just trying to think about are you helping the solution now from the outside?
I think a lot of the work that I do is usually it's when things have gone wrong. It's more of a forensic approach. I always try and keep an open mind in relation to what the MLRO has done and try and find the good things they've done. I think quite often by the time people like me turn up and it's a 166 environment, it's a VREC environment, it's things have gone wrong, and I think MLROs need to be supported. And I think if you're making a decision, and we all make decisions on the fly as an MLRO that sometimes backfire, I think if you're confident in the decision that you've made, you've clearly documented why you've done something, and you can explain it, I think you're going to always have less issues. And that's what I look for. I always want to look for the good. And don't get me wrong, there are certain MLROs out there who are rotten and have done the wrong thing and have run for the hills. But the vast majority out there are doing the right thing and doing it from a good place. And I think if you're able to defend your decisions and you've got good documentation, it's always going to leave you in a good place.
So to go back to the very top questions, how do we stop MLRO burnout? Your top 3 tips.
Top 3 tips, I think, would be pay. Absolutely. I think pay and resources are a huge one. I think if the MLRO has got the support, they can delegate work to people. They're not having to do everything. They can bring in the right skills when they need it. That's a big one. I think 2, MLROs talking to each other and having other, leaning on other networks and having other people they can pick up the phone to talk to about these issues is really, really important. The amount of times that I had something difficult I had to deal with, and I lucky enough have people that I could pick up the phone to and say, hey, how would you handle this situation? Gives you a huge amount of reassurance that you're doing the right thing. And then if heaven forbid something does go wrong, which is probably point number 3, is that you've documented and evidenced everything. It can be time consuming, and quite often decisions need to be made on the fly. And that's half the challenge being an MLRO is being able to make those decisions quickly whilst doing other things. I think the main thing and the main sort of big important thing that I would put out there is just document. It's probably things that we've all heard before, but the amount of situations I've seen where people have made a pretty dicey or somewhat controversial decision, and then when being looked at retrospectively, you think, why on earth did that MLRO make that decision at the time? if it's evidenced and recorded properly, it will make your life a whole lot easier to account to both, board, senior management, and if necessary, regulators and law enforcement.
So pay and resources, community support, and documentation.
Yeah, definitely the three top things.
And so we're nearing the end, but as I said, it wasn't only you who have faced, the MLRO burnout. Lots of people commented, sent DMs. It's an issue that really, it's an issue that people care about. So before we close up, I just wanted to share some points from the wider laundry community. So Leanne P. writes, Leanne writes the following. Firms offering an MLRO anything less than 100K at a bare minimum should expect high turnover, especially when their necks are on the line and there are poor systems and controls. And we said salary is the top thing here. Do you agree? Is 100K too little for an MLRO?
Yeah, all depends on the size of the firm. I think, there's some of the smaller firms out there, their entire compliance budget might be 100 grand. So, it's quite a lot to ask for that as a salary. But I think, overall, once you start to deal with the more medium-sized firms and up, 100K should really be the base for the amount of risk that you need to take on board, the amount of customers you're having to deal with. Absolutely agree with that.
Me too. 100% agree. Then Steve Watson, he writes, if business leaders don't adequately support the MLRO, treat them as a trusted professional advisor with appropriate authority and act on their recommendations as is expected by most regulators, then that could also be another reason for leaving a specific firm. And we did touch upon culture. So how do we improve on this feedback loop that he touches upon?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think finding the right MLRO is always is important. It's vital and critical. And how firms do that is always going to play a vital role in the end. I think if you're going through recruitment firms, they're not necessarily going to find you the right person. They'll find you a person. But getting that right and making sure that what the individual is prepared to do and take on board in terms of risk is aligned with what the business is going to do. Like I sort of mentioned earlier, the amount of businesses I've seen that have decided all of a sudden overnight, we're going to do crypto, or we're going to move into a high-risk third country, or we're going to do something completely different, which that MLRO was never really prepared for or involved in the decision-making, is always going to backfire.
Agree. And then final one here, Andrew S., he writes, and this touches upon something we said earlier as well about making the C-level more responsible. Make the CEO carry direct personal responsibility with the chair of the board personally responsible for overseeing the CEO's performance. Then you will get some attention. So what do you think?
Yeah, look, through, I guess, from a UK perspective with the senior management, the SMRC, which everyone's sort of probably familiar with the UK audience, maybe, and there's equivalent schemes outside of the UK, the C-suite have a level of accountability and responsibility for this. I think what's important is that people who sit in other senior management functions that are not in the financial crime perspective feel a bit of the pressure and pain that the MLRO is constantly feeling. And I think if there's some way of, rotating that around so that everyone who's in any sort of senior management function can feel a bit of that and can understand and appreciate it a bit more, I think you'll start to see some better outcomes. But that's not to say that I know there'll be listeners in other countries that don't have an equivalent scheme. And I think for them, it's even more vital that the C-suite feel and understand the heavy burden that people who work in compliance face.
I agree. And if there's anyone who is interested in digging more into this topic of culture, I would recommend going back to episode 39 of The Laundry, where the topic is how a naive compliance culture opened the doors for money laundering, which is with the former chief compliance officer in Swedbank, Vilaca Strangert, who we know she lost her job in Swedbank after raising concerns about money laundering. And we know that they ended up getting a big fine. So it's a very interesting conversation. And thanks so much to everyone who sent in their thoughts on this topic. Please do keep chatting with us on social media, and we'll keep feeding that into the show. Thank you so much for joining, Adam. This brings
Thanks,
the
Marit.
spin of the laundry to an end. Where can people find out more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm. You can find me on LinkedIn. So my name's Adam Vilaca. Surname's so it's Vilaca. Find me on LinkedIn. More than happy to connect and chat with anyone who wants to talk about this further.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to go check out the back catalog and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform or of choice, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. To get in touch with the Laundry team, you can comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit. Our producer was Matthew. Our engineers were Nicholas and Dominic. If you're looking for an effective AML solution for your organization, you should go check out Strise.ai. See you next time.